Does that threaten the independence of the judiciary, or is it saying the quiet part out loud and something every government does? Let's bring back the front bench to talk about that. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Rob, I'll start with you. Your paper has done a lot of the reporting on this. How big of an issue for the Premier, in your view, is this at this moment?
It's become a bigger issue. My colleague Jacques Gallant broke this story on February 23rd, Vassy, and at the time, I loved the story, and that two appointees to this 13-member panel had been former Ford staffers, and I thought it was a great one-day wonder kind of story. But the next day, the Premier was asked about it, and he sort of leaned into it and said, "Yeah, I want like-minded people to pick like-minded judges." And then his office that afternoon said, well, no, what he meant to say is he wanted like-minded people to be on this panel. And then he's doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down, quintupled down on it. And he's been asked about it in question period many times by the opposition. And he's really leaned into it. But there has been a backlash. And I think there is a concern in the legal community that he is suggesting that judges be political, and they aren't in this country. It's not like the United States, and I think it's that there is a problem for the Premier perception-wise, I think.
Why do you think then, Tom, the Premier is leaning into it? Like, what is the motivation for that, do you think? Because when he does do that, he often talks about repeat offenders, for example, being too easily awarded bail, something that we've heard other premiers talk about. He talks about people feeling unsafe. He is, as Rob points out, very much leaning into it.
This has always been pretty safe territory for right-wing governments. They talk law and order issues. They're trying to talk to their base. Many of the cultural communities that have supported the Ford Nation are also very concerned. They're shop owners and they're people who face crime issues daily, and they also find that this can be sometimes quite lax. Of course, the Bar Association, the Law Society, is quite right to say, hold on, we don't want you saying something like that. But in fact, I loved your expression in your question, Vassy. This is the silent part that people are just expressing out loud. It doesn't matter where you are. There's always going to be political influence in that judicial nomination process. Much to his credit, since Justin Trudeau arrived, even though a lot of the appointments have been late and we've had a lot of vacancies, he's made it his business to try his best to improve diversity amongst judges. There are so many people from so many varied backgrounds coming out of our law schools. They just don't seem to make it to the bench. So that has to do with the vetting process. That has to do with people's prejudices. And Trudeau said, no, I want to have judges that represent all of society. Ford's trying to say, look, I find this far too lax. I find that people get out too easily. This is one of the themes of Pierre Poilievre as well. And he's simply saying, I want to put in tougher judges. Now, he's put in a couple of people on a larger panel that he feels might be able to help push that side of his agenda. What we're talking about essentially is him favoring, for example, former prosecutors to try to put them on the bench, figuring that they'll be more prone to being tougher. But you know what? They're just going to be good judges with a good legal background. And if they're qualified otherwise, it doesn't matter who named them, they're going to do their job.
Is there a difference, Lisa, between, saying that you would hope judges, or that you would like to do what you can to ensure judges are ideologically similar to yourself, versus that you want them to be diverse, and you're sort of attaching a certain ideology in that respect too? Is there a discernible difference from where you sit to that?
Guys, we're just splitting hairs on this one. Like, there's seven appointments that the government can make on this 13-member committee. He's putting some people on there because he views them as having the same kind of principles as he does. And let me give you some news here. I think most Ontarians agree with this one. They're sick and tired of seeing people coming out on bail and having more crimes committed. And they do blame the judicial system. They do blame the judges. And I think this is very safe and very fertile ground for a Doug Ford to be in. Yeah, I'm not surprised he's doubling, quintupling down. This is good for him. By the way, I appreciate the clip from the Minister of Justice, Minister Virani, but he has to remember that he can get indignant about not putting any Liberals on a committee. But, the diversification in New Brunswick was that only 5 of the 6 appointments that happened in 2003 were friends of Dominic LeBlanc or neighbors or close friends. Right?
Yeah, that's the reality. No, the other add-on I would say is the head of the advisory committee even struck for the Supreme Court appointments last August was headed by a former Liberal Premier, in that case, Wade McLaughlin. I guess that, Brian, the sort of two things that appear to be coming out of this are that it is very politically fertile ground. To Lisa's point, I did this on the radio show today. I was inundated with text messages, like inundated, not a single one of them, and this is not normal. Usually you get people from all, like not a single one of them was critical of the Premier's stance. And I interviewed someone who represents lawyers who was raising some concerns about, namely, that they feel this will impact the public's perception of the independence of judges and that they will get a fair shot regardless of where they lean politically. I feel like that sentiment can be true, but I also feel like it is true that people are worried about repeat offenders being let out too easily and are sort of in line with the Premier's political philosophy around crime and safety.
Yeah, the fact that you got the call skewing that way doesn't surprise me at all. I think to points made, I think, by almost everybody, the idea that the people in Ontario and probably in many urban centers across the country and really in different regions as well, maybe more so than before, people want crime to be addressed. They're worried about it more than I would say that I would have had a sense that they were a few years ago. So I think Premier Ford is recognizing that and saying to himself, well, I can talk about being tough on crime, to Tom's point, which can resonate with the base, but also in this case probably a little larger base of people, or I can defend the procedural process of our judicial system. And I think your call skewed a certain way because Premier Ford is probably right in his political calculation that people care a lot more about the crime rates than they care about the appearance of the judicial system being as independent as it definitely should be. That said, I didn't hear the interview, but the lawyer that you would have had or the expert that you would have had saying that they're worried about the perception, I would worry about that too. I know there's other lawyers on this panel. I would worry a bit about that as well. That said, we're appointing people, that premiers appoint people, governments appoint people to these committees. These committees ultimately just make a recommendation. So I also think we may be looking a little bit too much into it and sort of maybe overblowing what this committee can actually do. They just simply make recommendations, and it's all ultimately the Attorney General of the government that makes the decision. I will, though, say that two former staffers feels a bit intense in terms of sort of patronage, but nevertheless, that committee doesn't have as much of doesn't have the final say and as much power as one would think. And I'll just make one comment. I think you can put competent people that will do a good job on the bench and try to address diversity. To my knowledge, I think New Brunswick, when I was there, and our government made a suite of appointments, had the first provincial court benches be gender equal, and we had gender parity. And I think we were the only ones since as well. So, and they were great judges, in my humble opinion. So certainly it is possible to have competency and ensure that you have diversity of perspective.
Okay, I have to leave it there. Thank you all for your diversity of perspectives this evening. I appreciate it. Our front bench, Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie.